Welcome to our workshop on objections and other replies. Often, when I assign a paper or a discussion board topic or an essay question on a test, I ask people to reply to something, particularly to reply to someone else's argument. And one form of reply is an objection. In this presentation, we're going to talk about how to clearly present objections and other replies. Right? So I'll give you some techniques that will help your reader understand, right, what you're trying to say. Now, if you haven't done so, right, you should watch the workshop on argumentation. Okay? I'm going to build on the concepts that I present there, okay, to explain the clearest way to present an objection or another kind of reply. Let's start off by addressing the question, what is a reply? A reply is a response to someone else's argument. For example, suppose someone says, Philosophy 306 is an awesome class because it has a brilliant professor. And someone comes along and says, you're correct that it's an awesome class and you're right that it has to do with the brilliant professor, but it's also because the professor is kind and friendly and personable as well. Well, the person's giving a kind of a reply to the argument, in this case, providing more reasons to think that the argument works. Okay. Now, another example might be, oh, Philosophy 306, yeah, that professor isn't all that smart, he just fakes it well. Right? Well, that would be another type of reply. In that case, it would be an objection. There are many types of replies. Right? For example, there could be a clarification. Right? You could say, oh, when you say brilliant, right, I agree, but I think you particularly mean brilliant in his knowledge of his own field. Or corroboration, and hey, look, this paper he produced proves the same thing. Or, as I've already given, an objection, right, a reason to think it's not true. Or an illustration. Oh yes, last week's lecture on affirmative action just demonstrates how brilliant the professor is. Or a request for any of the above. Right? It could be, so what did you mean when you said he was brilliant? Were you talking generally or just in his own field? Right? It could be statements of agreement, right? Which is, yes, you're right, he is brilliant. Right? Or, no, you're wrong, right? He's not brilliant. Anything like that. In this presentation, we're going to focus on one type of reply, objections. Right? Objections are replies that are designed to show that something goes wrong with the person's argument. Right? In the end, we'll talk a little bit about how what we have to say here is relevant to other kinds of reply. Right? But objections are particularly important for our purposes for the following reason. This is a philosophy class. And philosophy tends to work through something that's sometimes called dialectic. How does this work? Well, someone makes an argument. Might be a good argument, might be a bad argument. Let's say it's a good argument. Well, someone says, you know, that's a pretty good argument, but look, here's a problem with it. Right? And then someone says, ooh, that's a good objection, but here's a problem with your objection. Right? And another person says, you know, I think your objection works, but here's how we fix the original argument. And someone says, well, no, that doesn't work, and we go on from there. Right? When we do that for a while, right, we improve our arguments, right, which has two benefits. One is people who disagree better understand each other, right? And sometimes, we hope, the people who are wrong on the particular issue will be convinced by the strongest arguments. Right? So the people who happen to be correct on the issue will, after all the arguments have been made, right, they'll have made it clear that they're correct and why they're correct. Right? So objections are an important part of philosophical discussion. Right? And for that reason, I'm going to focus on the question, how do we present an objection? An objection is an argument whose conclusion is that something is wrong with another argument. Let me give you an example to illustrate objections. This example is from the movie Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Now, let me give you some background so you can understand what's going on. Right? The characters, the children in the book, are students at a school for wizards. Right? They all have this inborn magical talent, and they're learning how to use it. Now, they're basically in their class for defense against the dark arts, which is against evil magic. Now, one of the students, named Harry Potter, right, has been targeted by an extremely evil villain, right, named Lord Voldemort. Right? He has recently sort of come back from being almost dead, right? But not everyone believes that he's actually back. So here's the conversation between the students and their new teacher for Defense Against the Dark Arts.
Your previous instruction in this subject has been disturbingly uneven. But you'll be pleased to know, from now on, you will be following a carefully structured, ministry-approved course of defensive magic. Yes.
There's nothing in here about using defensive spells?
Using spells? Well, I can't imagine why you would need to use spells in my classroom.
We're not going to use magic.
You will be learning about defensive spells in a secure, risk-free way.
Well, what use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
Students will raise their hands when they speak in my class. It is the view of the ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which, after all, is what school is all about.
And how's theory supposed to prepare us for what's out there?
There is nothing out there, dear. Who do you imagine wants to attack children like yourself?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe Lord Voldemort.
We can look at this as an argument and an objection. Right? So Harry Potter is basically making the following argument in the form of a question. There are dangerous things out there that we need to guard against, right? And so we should be learning how to use magic in our own defense. Now the teacher's response is to say, your argument doesn't work because there's nothing out there that's threatening you that you need to defend yourself against. And of course, Harry Potter then comes up with an objection to her objection, which is, yes, there is. There's an evil wizard out there named Lord Voldemort, right, who's trying to kill people, right, including us, including particularly Harry. Right? So see what you've got here. Harry gives an argument. His teacher, Professor Umbridge, gives an objection to the argument, and then he gives an objection to her objection. Right? So remember, an objection is an argument whose conclusion is that something is wrong with another argument. In a previous presentation, we addressed the structure of arguments. So we talked a little bit about how arguments work. Now this leads us to the question, do objections work differently from other arguments? The basic answer is no. Objections are just a special type of argument that work like any other argument. Right? So an objection will typically involve a conclusion, evidence for the conclusion, that is, reasons to believe the conclusion is true, warrant for the conclusion, reason to believe that the evidence is a reason to believe the conclusion is true, and then evidence for the evidence, and warrant for the evidence, and blah, 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 blah. Right? As you know, it can go on forever. At some point, you have to stop. So basically, objections have the same structure as any other argument. Right? What makes them distinctive is not the structure of the argument, it's the nature of the conclusion. What makes them distinctive is that objections are arguments for the conclusion that something is wrong with another argument. Right? Beyond that, they tend to work like other arguments. Now, there is a kind of a partial exception here. Objections require special attention to how you introduce the argument. Now, as I've said, the only thing that distinguishes an objection from any other argument is its conclusion. And the conclusion of an objection is always one of the following. Something that someone else said is not true, or something that someone else said does not prove what it's supposed to prove. Okay, so let's look back at the Harry Potter example. Right? Harry Potter said we need to learn defensive magic, right, in order to defend ourselves against serious dangers. Right? Now, implied was, and there are serious dangers out there we need to defend ourselves against. The teacher came back by saying, there is nothing out there that you need to defend yourself against. Why? Because no one's going to attack children like you. Right? So she was saying, one of the assumptions in your argument does not work. Right? Your claim that there are dangers out there that you need to be able to defend yourself against does not work. When people present objections, they tend to leave out two very important points. First, they fail to tell the reader exactly what point in their argument they want to criticize. Or more precisely, they fail to tell the reader exactly what point in the original argument they want to criticize. They also fail to explain why their objection creates a problem for the argument that they want to criticize. Okay. Now let's take another look, a brief look at that exchange between Harry Potter and Professor Umbridge, right? Looking particularly at how he comes back with an objection to her objection.
It is the view of the ministry that a theoretical knowledge will be sufficient to get you through your examinations, which after all is what school is all about.
And how's theory supposed to prepare us for what's out there?
There is nothing out there, dear. Who do you imagine wants to attack children like yourself?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe Lord Voldemort.
Notice in this clip, Harry really only says a few words. I don't know, maybe Lord Voldemort. Now, he's not spelling things out, and he's doing it for a couple reasons. First of all, the people who made the movie assume that everybody who goes to see that movie has seen one of the previous movies or books. So they know who Lord Voldemort is, they know the background, they know what he means by that. And the second is, it's a response to a question she just asked. Right? Now, if someone were to talk about that point in the movie, right, for another person, they couldn't just say, Harry said Lord Voldemort. They'd have to say, okay, Professor Umbridge was claiming that there's nobody out there that wants to harm them. Right? So Harry said that there is someone who wants to harm him, and his evidence for that is Lord Voldemort is out there on the loose trying to kill people. Now, people might say, okay, wait, but what does that have to do with the kids in this school? In which case you'd have to fill in, well, there's one particular kid at the school he targets, he doesn't like the headmaster, you'd go into all kinds of things from the book. Now, if someone has read the books, or particularly if they'd read the books up to this one, that wouldn't have to be explained to them. But if a person was unfamiliar with the Harry Potter series and you were trying to explain Harry's argument, you'd have to fill in those gaps. Right? So, the point is, when you're presenting an objection, particularly in a piece of writing, it's helpful to clarify, first of all, what point in the other person's argument you want to criticize, and second, right, why your objection is relevant, right, to the argument that they were making. To illustrate this point, I want to take a look at some examples. Okay? So I want you to now take the first quiz. Right? And the first quiz is going to illustrate why it's so important to supply context.